And good evening to you, Corinne. I hope everyone is safe. Weather seems to be a bit extreme throughout the United States today. At least that's the way it seems from the news. We're looking at clouds and lower temperatures than we're used to. You know, we get nervous when it gets below 60 degrees here in Palm Springs. In a moment, I'm going to ask Steve to tell us a little bit about Ash Wednesday, which was yesterday, in this period of Lent, and how that is interpreted and reinterpreted throughout the generations a little bit. And I didn't ask Steve beforehand, but I figured this is the kind of thing you can answer on the spot. Why don't we move to gallery view here? No. Magdalena, can you take us off spotlight? Oh, I've got it here. There we go. Okay. So Steve, I'll ask you in just a moment to say a few words, but I want to remind everybody that this program, that is the amount of time that I spend, Steve volunteers his time, I spend an enormous amount of time on this effort, but it's made possible through the support of the Jewish Federation of the Desert out here. And that's why their logo is on the pages and the things that we do. And to bring us back to the beginning, this is a grant that we got in order to take our own unique approach to dealing with anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism, which stems from readings of scripture in certain Christian circles today, certainly in the past, and that in no way is to insinuate that the people present have anti-Semitic tendencies through reading these texts, but by reading these texts together, we further understand and sensitize ourselves on both sides. That's something that is important to us that we've mentioned a few times, especially in the last few weeks, how important it is. And as we you know, we're kind of into the final section, you know, wherever you run around the bend in the race, towards the end of the book of Acts now. And something for us to think about going forward. Do we want to find a different way? Do we want to try to organize a trip to Israel maybe together? Do we want to, you know, how might we continue this? Or was this good for this particular moment? Also a legitimate answer. But for now, because it's one of those times in the calendar that we kind of explain both sides of the calendar to each other, the beginning of Lent, an Ash Wednesday yesterday. Steve, I can't see if you've got a little bit of oil and ashes still on your forehead, but please let us tell us a little bit about what it is for you and what it's been for your communities.
And David, I guess we can make contributions.
We have a little problems hearing you. Is there a way is there something with your microphone?
Can you hear me now?
Barely.
Barely. Okay.
Oh, you can hear fine. So it's on my end. Sorry, go ahead.
We can make contributions to the Jewish Federation while we're at it. Was that?
Oh, that wasn't that wasn't.
I know, but I mean, I'm just asking for myself.
No, I would say the contributions would be to Or Hamidbar, which makes this work possible. It gives me the time. It's still working, you know, to see these things through here and through other things. For instance, this Sunday, there's an interfaith prayer with a lot of folks from out of town having to do with reparations for a particular issue here in Palm Springs that we're dealing with, Section 14. Something happened in the 50s and 60s. But my participation and my organizing in the time, or Hamidbar being there, then if people would like to support Or Hamidbar, please do so. You can find out the information on our website. But thanks for bringing that up.
You got it. Great. Yeah. So Ash Wednesday, it's an ancient practice in the church whereby we are given an opportunity to prepare ourselves for Holy Week, for Easter, for Good Friday and Holy Saturday and Easter. Ash Wednesday launches that, you know, it's reminiscent of Jesus's time in the desert after his baptism, and the temptation stories in the Gospels, where he wrestles with the call and what does it mean to be a human being? What does it mean to be fully human? What is it? What is our calling, and how can we discern that and enter into that more fully? And I remember I was in college years ago when I grew up in the Episcopal Church, so we observed Ash Wednesday, always had to give up something for Lent. And in 8th grade, I gave up candy, and I was at the Globe department store with my dad on a cold Saturday. And I remember we were checking out, and there was I hadn't eaten candy in weeks. And so I had this craving. There was this candy apple, and luckily I had a coat because it was cold. I just stole it, put it in my jacket. When I knew I was going to take a bite of that apple. And I just went straight home, went into my closet, closed it, took a bite of a terrible apple. It probably took a tooth out, if it would have taken a tooth out. And then just this shame, this immense shame, I felt like Adam back in the garden, I think. But then later in college, my 4th year, I hadn't given up anything since college, and was living a typical college life, coming of age, trying to figure out where I belong in the world. And I walked by All Saints Episcopal Church on my way to class, and then I was in class, and just again, I just had this compulsion to leave and go back to the church. So I did. It's about 12:15. It's a noonday service. I go in, I kneel down. I'm not praying. I'm just trying to figure out what I need to give up for Lent. And so I'm thinking of the usual suspects. I'll just give up drinking. I can do it. And they let you do it on Sunday. Now, Steve, be honest, give up smoking dope. And then I was trying to negotiate that piece. And the next thing I know, this interior voice came in out of the blue unexpectedly.
I'll be right back. Okay.
And said in so many words, I don't give a shit if you drink or smoke dope. I want you to give your whole heart. And so I did. And that really launched me on my own spiritual journey. And I found the joy of wholeheartedness. It caught me by surprise, and there was a freedom there. And the next thing you know, I'm in a seminary learning Greek, and the rest is history. But so Ash Wednesday is meaningful to me in that regard. Lots of folks, use it just as a way to be more intentional about that period up until Easter, when we when Lenten season is over. Lent, by the way, it just means lengthening. It's an Anglo-Saxon word for spring. So we're moving. The days are getting longer along the way.
So from a Jewish point of view, the parallel would be the days of the month of Elul that lead up to Rosh Hashanah, and then Yom Kippur, which is also a 40-day period, 30 days of Elul that month. The 6 months according to biblical counting, and this while there are those authors also that suggest giving up something during that amount of time, during that period of time, but that's never been the normative Jewish practice, even in the Orthodox world. But there's something there's something rather mystical about the cross on the forehead. Do you still do that? Was that something you would go to church to get done, Steve?
Yeah. Remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return.
Yeah.
There's
Another just a moment, Don. There's another parallel, and that's in the book of Ezekiel, where Ezekiel has this vision where Gabriel, or the heavenly scribe, we assume it's Gabriel, heavenly scribe marks a tav, which is like an X or a cross, on the forehead of all the good guys in the world to come. And I think there's probably a parallel there as well. My own story is that growing up in Israel, or growing up in Sherman Oaks, California, and I don't think there were very many Catholics around, or there were Jews and Armenians in my school. That's what I remember. Very few Christians in public school. And then I moved to Israel, soon after. And then on a fundraising trip, once I was in New York on the subway, and I see somebody with a smudge on their forehead. I said, "Oh, should I say something?" And then I look around, I get on the subway, and there's all these people smudge, and I thought I'm like in one of these movies where I can see aliens or something. I had no idea whatsoever what it was. Nothing. It was why do all these people have marks on things? And of course, I asked the next appointment I had, and they kind of laughed at me. And anyway, Dawn, how about for you?
Well, first of all, the ashes are from burned leftover palms from Palm Sunday of the previous year. And it is an ancient ritual. I think it's a period of internal dialogue and awareness to change those things that separate you from God and from your fellow man. It may have other sacramental meanings, but that is how I look at it.
Great.
Steve?
Yeah.
I mean, the story you told is just so much better than what most of us do, where we're, giving them chocolate cake for Lent, or, Starbucks coffee or something like that. I mean, the whole idea of giving yourself completely is so appealing. The problem is, I think, for most of us, it's not in our own ability to do that. So maybe that's where grace comes in. But that was, I wish what you did, what you were able to do, I guess it was a gift, would happen for all of us.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And it was a gift. I mean, it came out of the blue. I didn't expect it.
Yeah.
Jim?
I was wondering also if it might be reminiscent of the ancient times when people repented of something, because Lent is a period of considering one's sins and repenting prior to Easter. I'm thinking of when people were called to account by the prophets, they would tear their clothes and cover themselves with ashes in an act of repentance. I wonder if our Ash Wednesday practice of the mark is perhaps reminiscent of that as well.
Beautiful, Jim. Very much so. That's well said.
Yeah, I think in prophetic literature and all through and in practice as well, it's not a confusion. Perhaps it's a conflation sometimes, but it's certainly a mixing of mourning and repentance, mourning and tshuva. In our tradition, fasting is similar to both those things. Dawn, there's a Jewish practice where you burn your chametz, your leavened bread, before the day before Passover. You may have heard of that. You clean it out of the house and then you burn it. Most liberal Jews don't bother burning; they just throw it out. And you're supposed to light that fire or use the dried lulav, palm frond from Sukkot to do that. And the reasoning is that you should use something that was used for a mitzvah, for a commandment, should continue to be used for another commandment. So I like that connection, that parallel there with what you said.
David, in New York City, you see Jews, I think, taking their sins written on a piece of paper and throwing them in the East River. So I don't know if that's the same thing, but it seems like it's a form of confession.
Yeah, there's a practice called tashlich, which means to throw, to send. Yes, there are some people that would write the sins on paper, but the original custom was just to be at a water side of a water and say a few verses, and have this intention of throwing them on the water. Then other customs began to grow. One of them was to empty your pockets of crumbs that might have been, and then throw the crumbs in the water. And then and symbolically, you're throwing your crumbs away. And that's not around Passover time. This is before. This is on Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, or before Yom Kippur. And then it became, oh, well, the fish are eating your sins, and that's how we get rid of our sins. And it was the folklore grows and grows and grows on this, which led to people like me saying, you know what, we can do tashlich, but we don't need a body of water. We certainly don't need any fish. Some people believe that it doesn't work if you don't have fish. A predecessor and what? Yes, Richard grew up with that tradition, right? Okay. Anything else?
And to say that's why I have a koi pond, so I can go out every day and give my sins to the koi.
I don't know if that pond is big enough, if there's enough koi in that pond for you.
Don't tell Harvey he'll want to buy more fish.
Yes, Ajit, did you want to say something? Okay.
Tom did, I think.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's going to a Catholic high school, which I truly loved. There really was this practice that you had to have fish on Fridays. So I'm not sure exactly where that came from, but I gather the connection of Lent with fish, which you explained, would make sense and connect the two.
Okay. All right. Yeah, lots of interconnections. Intersectionality in our own understanding of the word. Okay. So we left off in the middle of, or I guess at the beginning of, where we left off at the end of 21, right?
Yeah, I think we went a little further.
Right.
We're now where Paul is going to tell his story of,
Right. Great.
of conversion, but I think it'd be good to just start at the beginning.
Okay. So we are where Paul is defending himself, and so why don't we let's begin at the beginning of chapter 22. If somebody would like to read, Tom, you want to read for us?
I have to confess my sin of not being able to print out the reading.
It must be the fish in the water. Okay.
I think it's the fish in the water, exactly.
All right. Steve Byrne?
Yeah, I'll read. Starting in 22.
Yeah, why not?
Okay. 22. Brothers and fathers, listen to the defense that I now make before you. When they heard him addressing them in Hebrew, they became even more quiet. Then he said, I am a Jew born in Tarsus in Cilicia, but brought up in the city at the feet of Gamaliel, educated strictly according to our ancestral law, being zealous for God, just as all of you are today. I persecuted this way up to the point of death by binding both men and women and putting them in prison, as the high priest and the whole council of elders can testify about me. From them, I also received letters to the brothers in Damascus, and I went there in order to bind those who were there and bring them back to Jerusalem for punishment. Do you want me to keep going, or?
Yeah, because we've already talked about the fact. Okay, yeah, I think it's enough. Why don't you go ahead and do the next section? Yeah.
Okay. Paul tells of his conversion. While on my way and approaching Damascus about noon, a great light from heaven suddenly shone about me. I fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to me, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? I answered, who are you, Lord? Then he said to me, I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting. Now those who were with me saw the light, but did not hear the voice of the one who was speaking to me. I asked, what am I to do, Lord? The Lord said to me, get up and go to Damascus. There you will be told everything that has been assigned to you to do. Since I could not see because of the brightness of that light, those who were with me took my hand and led me to Damascus. A certain Ananias, who was a devout man according to the law and well spoken of by all the Jews living there, came to me, and standing beside me, he said, Brother Saul, regain your sight. In that very hour, I regained my sight and saw him. Then he said, the God of our ancestors has chosen you to know his will, to see the righteous one, and to hear his own voice. For you will be his witness to all the world of what you have seen and heard. And why do you delay? Get up, be baptized, and have your sins washed away, calling on his name.
Apropos, sins washed away, our conversation beforehand. So why do we think this is here? I mean, we've heard this before, right? We heard this in chapter 9, I think it was. Why is Paul bringing this up here?
Yeah, can I speculate on it?
Yeah, everything we're saying is speculation.
I think Paul's the point is that Paul did not see Jesus in face to face. Therefore, he would not have been considered one of the apostles. And by telling us here that he saw Jesus, he then elevates himself, or people elevate him to the rank of an apostle.
Yeah, certainly here. But one could say that for chapter 9, just to push back a little bit. What is it because he'll be less persecuted here? Why? Well, how does he think this is going to help his defense? Does it give him divine protection? Is that what you're saying?
No, it gives him leadership within the Christian community.
Okay.
And of course, in 9, it's really it's Luke's community telling that story, right? And now Paul is telling it from his own first person perspective. And I think Ajit is onto something. I mean, it seems he's trying to validate his connection to God.
Yeah. I also would say he's validating his transformation. And the greatest sign of his transformation is that he's no longer Saul. He's Paul now. Because from here on, he is Paul. And I have never figured out who gave him that new name. Did he decide it himself? Did Jesus confer that him in his vision? How did he go from being Saul to Paul? Who gave him that permission?
I always assumed, perhaps wrongly so, that was just the Greek translation, so to speak, like David is to David. Is that connected to that? I mean, Steve, what do we know about Paul?
Well, it's a curious question. I think it's easy and natural to think it reflects this conversion, but Saul, his Semitic name, is fits his Jewish identity. Paul, as he was a good Greek speaker and as well, and a Roman citizen, as it turns out, just represents kind of that Greek aspect. But I don't know. I mean, we're speculating.
So for me, from a literary point of view, this storytelling that he's doing now is parallel to how we began our time together today, with me asking a question about Lent and Steve answering me, not with a historical survey of the development of Lent, but with his own story, with his own personal story. And we see the power, which we all know, right? We know that, and while preachers, rabbis, priests, and others certainly misuse this particular rhetorical device of telling stories about their lives and perhaps talk about themselves too much, we know how powerful it is. We know how powerful it is in connecting to other individuals. And so the best way for him really, and maybe this is also what he's been doing in the churches, in the community, in the synagogues, excuse me, and the churches he's founding all around on the journeys. Maybe this is his stump speech, I think you call it, right? Maybe this is his elevator pitch, perhaps. That kind of occurred to me in reading this, why this appears here of all places. Yes, Don, and then Steve.
It's interesting, those who were with him saw the light but did not hear the voice, whereas in Pentecost, they saw the fire, tongues of fire, and heard the voices. It's just an interesting flip of what happened. Why didn't they hear what was being said is my question. why didn't the people who accompanied Paul hear this conversation that was going on?
Right. Could it have had to, could it be connected to the fact that one was in the temple and one was outside, or one was outside of the land? I don't know. Maybe the Jewish.
Interesting.
Steve?
There was two things that came to mind. One is my wife watches a lot of crime TV and trials, and they always tell the accused, you know, don't take the stand, is the typical thing. And here's Paul kind of boldly saying, hey, I want my time on the stand to say my piece and say it my way. And then the other thing that I thought was interesting, because I missed last week, but I listened to it before today's session, and there was a lot of talk, discussion about the Nazarite vow. And in this one, he says, you know, I am Jesus of Nazareth. And he didn't say that back in 9. And I don't know the tie of Nazareth and the Nazarite vow and how all that works, but it just, having heard all of that about the Nazarite vow last week, and then now Jesus of Nazareth here, sort of, it just sparked a thought in my mind, I guess.
Cool. Hadn't thought of that. And what connection to that is to the early Nazarenes, Nazarene sect. I don't know enough about that, but there are two different words in Hebrew, but they're connected. One is Nazir, with a z, like a Z sound. Nazir is the vow to become, but the Zayin and Tzaddik, and the other one is Nazrat. Nazareth is Nazrat with a Tzaddik. But Zayin and Tzaddik interchange in Semitic languages very often. And so that means that the words are connected. They're not exactly the same word, but they're semantically linked. And Nezer on a head has to do with hair or with a crown, kind of an idea. Netzer is also a top. We don't know why Nazareth, Natzrat or Natzeret, some people pronounce it in Hebrew. We don't know why it's called that, why it has that, possibly because it's on top of a mountain. But I think from an assonance point of view, certainly from this is the kind of thing, from a literary point of view, part of the art of the narrative here. I think that's a great idea. I like that idea. Somebody else wanted to say something? Yes, Harold.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the meaning here in the English of the word Lord. What am I to do, Lord? The Lord said to me. When I see Lord, I think of the Hebrew word Adonai, but I know this was in Greek. What was the Greek word used, and what does it mean?
Well, my guess would be kurios, but Steve, you have that usually.
Kurios, yeah.
Okay. I mean, is it the same thing as God or master or what?
You want to take this one, Steve?
Well, yeah, it's a great question. And just to preface that, Harold, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, right. I'm not married. I'm at my sister's.
So, David, I really appreciated what you said last week about the art of the narrative and in reading this text on its own terms, as opposed to, you know, a more historical, contextual approach that's helpful, you know, in studying the cultural, historical, political time is helpful to go deeper. But taken on its own terms, when I see in verse 8, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And then I answered, who are you, Kurios? Who are you, Lord? Then he said to me, so it's like to be addressed or to be interrupted in that way implies just a recognition of the sublime, of the transcendent in some way. And on the other hand, we know that Jesus was declared Lord by the early believers over and against Caesar as Lord, if you will. You know, he was now the center of their attention. and power. So, but also I think when I look at this, then he said to me, I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting. So this is a live dialogue and interaction, and suggesting that Jesus, who died, is now risen and now accessible or now engaged in history in this time. And now those who were with me saw the light but didn't hear the voice. I asked, what am I now to do, Lord? The Lord said to me, and then it's not as much of a conversion of Saul to Paul as a calling. He's being reassigned, as it were, and given this directive. But all the while, it's a live interaction that he has with, let's say, his with the risen Jesus. So that's just in the text itself that is very stark and real to me. And I think what Jim said goes, I think it was Jim, where it validates the anyway, that's all I'll say for that.
Can I add something here? This is two people talking. Both are from Jewish backgrounds, Hebrew, Aramaic speaking. Both Jesus and Paul spoke Hebrew, Aramaic. So the assumption here that they would have been speaking in Greek, probably, I don't know. The other thing is when he says, who are you, Lord? When he is saying, who are you, Lord, he has not yet accepted Jesus. Therefore, the term he is likely to have used here is Hebrew or Aramaic is Adonai, is the way I'm looking at it. Once he accepts Jesus as the Messiah, etc., then his saying the word Lord might have a different meaning. But here it simply means Adonai.
Nice.
Look at this stems from our confusion is the confusion of the ancient text already in biblical Hebrew and preserved and continued in Aramaic as well. The same word for Lord, Adon or Adonai, which literally means my gods. It actually is plural, Adonai. If it was my Lord, it would be Adoni. But that is kind of a nod to the other word in Hebrew for God, which is Elohim, which also literally is the plural, the gods. But they're both used on purpose as if to say, this is linguistically, the meaning of the linguistic development is if to say, what other people call gods, we call one, and we address it in the singular, in the single first person, as opposed to third person plural. And so so one way to get out of this is to translate differently, even though the Greek would have used the same word reflecting the Hebrew/Aramaic. And again, that's on purpose. That confusion, I think, is on purpose. That's the aim of the narrator here, of the author of Luke, is for us to see that fuzziness, that growth from something. But Carl Holliday, in this relatively new, really extensive, almost comprehensive commentary, he gives a different translation. Listen to follow along with verse 8. Looking at your text, I replied, who are you, sir? He said to me, I am Jesus the Nazarene, whom you are persecuting. Now those who were with me saw the light, but did not hear the voice of the one speaking to me. Then I said, what should I do, sir? And the Lord said to me, get up and go to Damascus. This reminds me, this is an intentional, I believe it's an intentional device used by the narrator. This reminds me of what Professor Moshe Greenberg of blessed memory taught us. I can think of two examples. We were studying Ezekiel with him, and by far the best commentary on Ezekiel today, even though it's not finished yet, is Moshe Greenberg of blessed memory, talking about the chariot that ascends from, in the book of Ezekiel, in the beginning of Ezekiel, that ascends and moves away from the Temple Mount. And the narrator, that is Ezekiel, who purports to be Ezekiel, is giving this description of he's seeing it in this, and female and male words and adjectives are totally mixed up. In Yiddish, we'd say it's verblungent, right? It's totally mixed up. And Greenberg taught us that that's on purpose. That's because it's as if the prophet looked like, I don't know what the hell I'm looking at. Is it male? Is it female? Is that? And there's a similar, for those that might remember when Saul, that is King Saul, was called, was Samuel was looking for Saul, and he finds a gaggle of young women in the countryside, and they saw him, and they saw Saul, and they talk about, oh yeah, we saw him. And when they describe him, they confuse plural and singular and male and female, or gendered, masculine and feminine. And that's to show they were so excited and so that they saw this beautiful, beautiful man that they couldn't even speak clearly. So I think that's on purpose here. So
Okay.
Harold, you led us to a great question that we wouldn't
Okay,
have.
but it doesn't mean, because when I think of Lord and Adonai, Adonai is God. And yet Paul, at this point in time, hadn't been thinking that Jesus was God or one with God. So that's why I was just asking about what the word.
Okay, so
Yeah.
Which is why I like the translation, sir. I mean, that fits
Yeah,
at
yeah.
this point. Me lord, me lady, it's a sign of respect to the other.
But Harold is raising actually something that's really confusing for me, and if I understand correctly, confusing for all of New Testament study, is when does God / the Lord mean Jesus, and when does it mean the Father? Right. And am I correct in assuming that is kind of a perplexing thing in general in New Testament studies, or is that just my problem?
No. I mean, that is, fast forward 300 years, it's being hammered out, in these early church councils, and theologians and philosophers are going back and forth, and heretics are being declared. And it's a real fascinating, complicated process. But there's a book by Larry Hurtado. It's One God, One Lord. And it goes into all of this background, the Jewish and the Jewish Christian background, where this emerged, the idea of the divinity of Jesus, and what were the precedents for that? What language that was used, and where did it come from? Stuff like that. It's a really fine question.
Yeah. And there are many other places in the New Testament where it seems that Jesus is declaring himself to be God, and where he's declaring himself to be just a man. I mean, there are many, many instances of that.
Great. Well, thank you for that. I can see that. We'll have to look into, if you want to see the in the chat, you can check what Steve was just referring to. Okay. Were there any other comments? Steve Byrne, did you have something else that you wanted to remark on? Just unmute, please.
No, those were the two things, just Paul taking the stand in defense of himself.
Okay. Megan, you want to continue reading for us today?
Megan, you're mute.
Yep. I'm all over the place here.
We're at verse 17.
Verse 17. Wait a minute. A certain Aeneas? No, that's the 12. Oh, 17. After I returned to Jerusalem, and while I was praying in the temple, I fell into a trance and saw Jesus saying to me, "Hurry and get out of Jerusalem quickly, because they will not accept your testimony about me." And I said, "Lord, they themselves know that in every synagogue I imprisoned, in every synagogue I imprisoned and beat those who believed in you. And while the blood of your witness Stephen was shed, I myself was standing by, approving and keeping the coats of those who killed him. Then he said to me, go, for I will send you far away to the Gentiles. To my next page.
So
Up to this,
Yeah, why don't we just, any other comments about this particular back and forth?
Well, just that, the criteria for selecting the apostle to take Judas Iscariot's place was that they were a witness to the resurrection. And so here Paul is validating that I too am a witness to the risen Christ. So just.
Right. And also an example of his own doing tshuva, of repentance at this point is part of his overall argument here.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't you go ahead, Megan?
okay. Up to this point, they listened to him, and then they shouted, away with such a fellow from the earth, for he should not be allowed to live. And while they were shouting, throwing off their cloaks and tossing dust into the air, the tribune directed that he was to be brought into the barracks and ordered him to be examined by flogging to find out the reason for his outcry against him. But when they had tied him up with straps, Paul said to the centurion who was standing by, is it legal for you to flog a Roman person who is uncondemned? When the centurion heard that, he went to the tribune and said to him, what are you about to do? This man is a Roman. The tribune came and asked Paul, tell me, are you a Roman? And he said, yes. And the tribune answered, it cost me a large sum of money. It cost me a large sum of money to get my citizenship, Paul said, but I was born a Roman. Immediately, those who were about to examine him drew back from him, and the tribune also was afraid, for he realized that Paul was a Roman and that he had bound him.
Okay, so I mean, reactions, Ajit, I think you've got something.
Yeah. Who is it that is about to beat up Paul at this point?
The centurion, I think, no? It's about to implement punishment, which was something that seems like one would do in order to restore order. Maybe I'm influenced a little bit too much by police or law enforcement agencies in the United States. The reactions, but I have a feeling this is something that's been done all along. And this, of course, for me reflects, well, no, wait a minute, not so fast, right? I got that diplomatic passport, or I'm white, or etc. But we don't want to go there,
Okay.
right?
So it's not the Jews or the Christians that are trying to beat up Paul. It's the Romans that are trying to beat up Paul. Is this correct?
No, the people that wanted to beat up Paul are hoi polloi that are out there that are angry with him, right? The masses. And if I understand correctly, the Roman centurion is coming in to make order, to bring about order, and he's got his baton.
But who are what you described as the hoi polloi? Who are these people? Are they Christians or Jews?
Well, originally, Ajit, it was the Jews from Asia who noticed him in the temple, you remember? And they rile up the hoi polloi.
But see, that doesn't make sense. Here it is, Paul saying, I was a Jew, I was persecuting the Jews, and I come back here and the Jews want to beat me up. I was one of them doing their bidding. Why would they want to beat him up? And the Christians are not enough in number to beat him up. So I'm having some trouble understanding the story.
Well, again, the Jews from Asia are those Jewish Christians in Galatia who gave Paul such a hard time and accused Paul of it's great to be to believe in Jesus as fulfillment of their long expected hopes, but it's another thing to blaspheme and to break the tradition and the laws. And so they were protecting their identity, and then by then it gets mixed up. The hoi polloi, the Jews who perhaps aren't Christians. And I think the outcry is much like it was crucify him in Jerusalem. It's away with this fellow. It's a mob scene. And then the Romans come in and they're ready to beat him to get at the truth and try to restore order. So it's a cluster.
Right, but this is happening at the temple,
That's right.
right?
No, we're not, are we?
Is this not happening at the temple?
Let's see,
Yeah,
where
that's what I thought.
is it still at the temple?
Yeah.
It's still at the temple, huh?
Paul's arrested.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is in his defense but
So we're still at the temple here.
I think so.
Okay,
Yeah. So,
that's
And-
right. That's right.
But the whole feeling I get here is, as Steve just said, is that this is a reenactment of sorts of
Maybe it is.
Jesus at the temple as well. And again, this mob mentality, kill him, whatever, do him. And then bringing in the Roman powers to be to interfere. But this time, though, there's a way to write the story differently, right, so to speak. And maybe that has to do with Paul's success, and that the story did pan out a little bit differently, the way he had a chance to talk. Whereas the reports we have of Jesus's defense was not nearly as detailed, right? At least what we have.
I have a question about the line where it says, the tribune answered, "It cost me a large sum of money to get my citizenship." Paul said, "But I was born a Roman." Is the centurion saying that he's a citizen too, only because he bought his citizenship?
Yeah.
And Paul's
and
saying, "Oh, gee, I got it for free because I was born." Is that what's going on there?
As someone I didn't live, since Sasha is not an American citizen, and I didn't live here enough in my life, when the law was changed, when our first three daughters were born, there was a grandparent clause, and they didn't get automatic American citizenship. But because we had this in the background, my parents could afford it, they hired a lawyer and went through a rather costly legal process that doesn't, I'm not saying the same thing. I think what they're referring to here is bribery, and not any kind of official purchase. I think that's what this is here. But because there was a connection and they could pay for it. Other families, other people I know, they didn't have that money to pay. They didn't have a wealthy grandparent in the United States, and therefore their kids, even though they were American citizens, their kids are not American citizens because they didn't live long enough here. I don't know if it's the same thing, but what I think that's what's going on. There was a widespread practice of bribery to get citizenship. I think that's kind of well documented.
But it is a curious detail, right?
Yeah.
For the narrative.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what it adds other than just a sense of drama.
Harold.
With regard to the Roman tribune, my understanding is that a great many, I couldn't give you percentages, right, but a great many men who were in the Roman army were not born Romans. They were recruited from among the peoples who had been, from among other peoples who had been conquered.
That's true.
So therefore, the tribune may not have been born a Roman at all, but then through bribery became a Roman citizen.
Yeah, good.
Okay. Yes. Steve Carson.
I'm trying to understand the examined by flogging. How does flogging examine him?
Do you not watch any TV?
Okay.
I mean, all the torturing to get it to get a confession. I think that's what, it's like, but it's also from the Jewish world. I think in late antiquity, there's this idea that you are flogged in order for somebody to admit what they did, and part of the repentance as well. Don, what do you say?
I think you couldn't do anything to a Roman citizen without first a trial being held.
Yeah.
And so I think this centurion realized he was on quicksand, as he was going after Paul. And the impression I get is that he got his citizenship fraudulently by buying it or by the Roman soldier. So he was up against someone who had real credentials in Paul.
Yeah. Okay. All right, then Megan, you want to finish it off?
Since he wanted to find out what Paul was being accused of by the Jews, the next day he released him and ordered the chief priests and the entire council to meet. He brought Paul down and had him stand before them.
Okay.
That was the Jews.
The Jewish sources that I brought, we talked about one of them last week, that having to do with Nazir. The other three is something I just want to focus in on, because too often it's easy for the Jewish side to complain, look how they're talking about us and look about this, but it's important for us to fess up to the chauvinism and the, I don't want to say reasons for anti-Semitism, but our attitudes are also challenging in this world that we live in of pluralism and exchange, honest exchange of ideas and histories. And so I brought these last three sources I'd like us to go through with the time we have left today, to talk about the chauvinistic aspects of Judaism and what might have fed certain reactions in the years, since these were talked about quite a bit, which is the same time. The sources we have here, while they weren't written down until around the year 200, many of them stem from the 300 years beforehand of oral debates and law interpretations of the Torah. So, Eileen, could I ask you to read from Mishnah Midot?
Sure. Inside of it, the wall of the Temple Mount was a soreg, a low fence around the temple, which served as a boundary beyond which entry to those impure were prohibited, 10 tafishim high. There were 13 breaches in it, made originally by the Greek kings. And when the Jews fixed these breaches, they enacted 13 prostrations equivalent to them. Inside the soreg was the shell, a low fence around the temple, which served as a boundary, beyond which entry to those impure were prohibited, which was 10 amot.
So the word tfachim, a tefach is this, if you look, it's a handbreadth, and an amma is a cubit or an arm. So those are the things. The only importance of this is to say the temple wasn't a free-for-all, just like every major institution in every religion, right? There's certain areas that you can go into. One of the claims against Jesus was, what was the claim? I didn't remember the verse where
It's Paul for bringing
against Paul, sorry, yeah.
for bringing someone illegally into the temple.
Right.
Forget his name.
Because he wasn't Jewish, or the conversation over his Jewish identity. And you're saying, so what's the big deal? Well, first of all, maybe let's think Mormon tabernacles, right? I think in Mormon centers, I think Gentiles, that is, and I love being a Gentile. I love going to Utah so that I could be a Gentile. Is forbidden, or other temples are. It's not what we have in mind is in a church so much. Although I guess you can't just go behind with the sacristy. I mean, not anybody can walk into a sacristy, right? Is that just politeness, or is there like any, whatever it is? A synagogue that we think of today, really you can go anywhere. You can't because of security reasons, but there's no area of the synagogue where you can't go. Well, that's not true. There are those traditionalists that say that a non-Jew should not be invited up to the bima, to the stage, for any reason. That's okay. See, I've been too embraced by my own liberalism for so long that I forgot my background. But anyway, there were different areas, and that's the point here. And the second Mishnaic tradition that I'd like to read, this is just part of a longer section that talks about, imagine a target, a bullseye, or a map that has concentric circles like those maps that have Jerusalem in the middle, the original Bunt, I forgot the name of the map, that has Jerusalem is in the middle of the map, and land of Israel and everything else is subservient to that. So think of this big target as the world, the land of Israel, the ancient cities, Jerusalem, and now we get to this, and the inside of on Temple Mount, and now we get to this section here in Mishnah Kalim 1a. Go ahead, Eileen.
The area within the wall of Jerusalem is holier, for it is there that lesser holy things and the second tithe may be eaten. The Temple Mount is holier for Zaim, Zavot, menstruants, and women after childbirth may not enter it. That Chel is holier, for neither non-Jews nor one who contracted corpse impurity may enter it.
Right. The 10 degrees of holiness of Jerusalem in this Mishnah, which I only gave 3 lines of, they're governed by exclusion, not inclusion, but exclusion. The holier it gets, the more exclusive it is, until you get to the very middle. So this mentioned the chayil, right? That's what they're talking about here. That's what the text in Acts is referring to, coming not just in the Temple Mount, but past a certain place where non-Jews were not allowed to go in, or whether you were impure. If you were Jewish, you were impure, or whether you were a woman and not a man. Different kind of stipulations that have to do with this exclusivity, which brings upon a holiness, a sacredness, and the Holy of Holies, which is where the rock is, which was thought in Middle Ages to be the place from where the world was created, the starting point of creation, but we don't get that until around the 9th, 10th century, but was believed to be, and this is in the time of Jesus, this is in the time of Solomon, maybe, and it's certainly in the time of throughout the temple, is that the rock where Abraham sacrificed his or was willing to sacrifice his son Isaac, and that rock, which is under today the Dome of the Rock, that's the Holy of Holies. Only the chief priest could go in there one day a year on the Day of Atonement on Yom Kippur, and only for one part of that day. It was so the idea of exclusivity brings about holiness is something which is a little bit offensive when we think about it, right? It's not just in Judaism, it's all over, right? It's in social constructs as well. The more exclusive it is, the club you belong to, the restaurant you go to, the whatever, the organization you're part of, all these things, there's an exclusivity or an exclusiveness which brings about a specialness or a chosenness, and that's kind of deep inside. And the most fascinating thing about this, from my point of view, as a student of religion and history, is that we don't have an archaeological dig of the temple, so we don't have a lot of the details because it's under a holy site right now, and it's not about to happen. But there have been digs around the temple for 150 years already, and already in 1871, an inscription was found with the following. An inscription was found in Greek with the following words. Go ahead, Eileen.
No stranger is to enter within the balustrade round the temple and enclosure. Whoever is caught will be himself responsible for his ensuing death.
This is cool. This is like finding, no trespassing from 2,000 years ago, a no trespassing sign, and will be prosecuted by the full extent of the law, whatever.
No trespassing sign, and as in Texas, if you come, I have a rifle in my garage.
So I've heard, Ajit, but I didn't want to bring that up.
By the way, in Islam, you cannot, as a non-Muslim, go into the city itself of Mecca and Medina.
Right, and so I experienced a strange thing in the Middle East. That is, first I knew from Israel that as a non-Muslim, I could not be in the mosque at the time of the prayer. So I knew that, and I knew that from other places. And then I was invited to an imam that I'd met I think I went to see him in Manchester, someplace, not London, right? North of London in England. And he said, well, it's a time for prayer. And I said, so should I wait in this coffee house? Why are you afraid? He says, well, don't you want to come in the mosque? I said, I'm allowed to? He says, oh, I hear. Only in the Middle East. In the Middle East, mosques are forbidden for during the time of prayer for non-Muslims to be inside. So I went and I could sit with the children, with the young boys in the back off to the side. And that was the first time I was in Muslim prayer. It was very excited, very touched by the whole thing. And then I come to California and I go to the mosque in Coachella, and I went to visit and to be with them. And of course I sit in the back. And one of the old men comes up and he takes me, he says, no, you would not need to be in the line with us. And I didn't want to say, dude, your religion says that if only Muslims can be in the prayer line. That's you, that's your halakha, that's your tradition, not mine. He says, I said, I don't think I'm supposed to. He says, no, I asked the imam, he said, you're allowed to. And ever since then, whenever I go there, they insist. And even when I was in another place where they stopped for the prayer, and I didn't assume that, the head of the imam came and stood next to me. And that's just a wonderful thing. Again, I don't want to say anything negative about those who feel that it is important for it to be exclusive. I understand that, but it's just a wonderful feeling for me that wants to experience that and to be part of the prayer line. Of course, others would say it's appropriation, and I have to be careful there as well.
Well, and
So-
also, David, the gospel detail at Jesus's crucifixion, when he dies, there's that earthquake, and the curtain of the Holy of Holies is split in two, you know, as a metaphor for it's been opened.
Opened and desecrated, yeah. There's a midrash, a rabbinic embellishment of the story, of the historical story of the Second Temple, destruction of the Second Temple, in which Titus goes into the Holy of Holies with two prostitutes and spreads out a Torah scroll on the altar and does his business on the altar with those two prostitutes. And he takes his sword and he slashes the curtain into half. Interesting kind of parallel, much later midrash than the gospel story. But well, we've covered quite a bit of ground today, from crosses, X's on the forehead to exclusivity in space. I'm going to ask, I didn't ask you before, but I'm going to ask that we take off next week. Sasha and I are traveling to visit our kids in Northern California. So if we can take a break next week, and we'll see each other in 2 weeks. Is that all right? Okay. Well, thanks for being here, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.